So I'd like to talk with you tonight about dangerous dreams, what climate ideologues get wrong on agriculture and energy. And I'm going to go through the slides fairly quickly because there's a lot to read. But first of all, let's take a trip back in time to 1989. This is what Bill McKibben wrote, and he's with 360.org. He's a longtime activist. His vision of the future was there would be no consumerism or material ambition. Americans would rarely travel, experiencing the world by internet only, grow much of their own food, power their communities with solar and wind, divert their wealth to developing countries, and this would be the way to set a moral example for countries like China to accept a grand bargain toward cleaner energy. So that's the view that these environmentalists have been working on all this time. In 2018, I went to the Porto climate conference in Portugal, and I met a man named Albrecht Glatzel. He's a Paraguayan agricultural expert, and he's written a number of papers about the fact that meat does not equal heat. And these papers you can read at your leisure. So the point is, let them eat steak if they want. Yeah, so he found that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change did a very poor baseline analysis of what life was like before industrial agricultural. And he found no livestock footprint in the global methane distribution. And so if you want to go vegan, you can, but it's not going to save the planet. And he found that there's no scientific basis whatsoever for claiming that going vegan would save the planet. Now, is nature something new? Because the Canadian government seems to think it is. And they think that they're just going to throw money at it, and somehow that will stop climate change. And part of their target is, of course, the agricultural community. And the purposeful support for their views seems to come from this one paper. Now, there are quite a few scholars on the paper, but if we look at the paper closely, my ag expert said to me, it's filled with misleading statements and faulty modeling. It incorrectly implies that fertilizer is not being properly applied by farmers, who probably know better than people in academic chairs about how much fertilizer they should use. And he also said that the reduced use of nitrogen fertilizers could be managed by switching cultivation from grains to legumes. Well, that's very nice for these academics to decide what kind of crop you should plant on your land with your soil. So my ag expert said, well, this is de facto a nonsense statement because wheat, barley, and corn production is not going anywhere. So there were more misleading statements, more faulty modeling, like they thought we should be planting different kinds of crops on the shoulder seasons. But in Canada, for the most part, there are no shoulder seasons. And also they came up with the idea of no-till, which no one's ever heard of here, right? And also doesn't work everywhere, does it? So I think there's some pretty big conflicts of interest because a couple of the lead authors of this paper are associated with the Nature Conservancy of Canada and Nature United. Nature United is kind of a puppy of Nature Conservancy. And if you look at the Canada Revenue Agency site, you'll find that governments gave $85 million plus to this allegedly tax funded charity. And it sounds to me like it's a bit of self-dealing, actually. I think that question should be asked. And what the purpose of this organization is, apparently, is connecting the true value of nature to new sources of financing, principally through carbon offset projects. So, carbon offset projects. I was just talking at dinner about, what carbon trading is, and there's huge carbon trading markets around the world. Trillions of dollars are changing hands in carbon trading. You're not seeing any of it. It's being vacuumed out of your pocket. But what is a carbon market? This is the best description I've ever read. The carbon market is based on the lack of delivery of an invisible substance to no one. Trillions of dollars. I also checked with another scholar, which is Professor William Van Wijngaarden, and I checked with him about the ratio of warming. Alberta's contribution to warming is 6,000ths of 1 degree Celsius in the past century. 6,000ths. So CO2 actually benefits the Earth because it's greening the Earth. Says who? Well, NASA. So, people always cite NASA on climate change. There you have it. That's the benefit. So what's happened? I think that this image from Adobe Stock is actually a very good representation of what's happened. There's this dichotomy between sort of Gaia represented by a woman and all those motherly instincts, and the hard realist guys who are doing the numbers and doing the hard work. And we've created this divide because of the whole climate change movement that really shouldn't be there. And of course, is the science settled? Well, no, comrade, it's not. This is a very important piece here, a bigger piece. This is from Deutsche Bank in Germany. They are planning to have an eco-dictatorship. So if you don't go along with the plans, you're going to be part of a climate tyranny. But in fact, science is not about consensus. It's about evidence. Science is not a democracy. And you probably have seen Al Gore's movie. In it, he claimed that there were no scientists in the abstracts that were surveyed who rejected the anthropogenic human-caused global warming theory. But Dr. Benny Peiser redid that same paper, redid that research, and he found that actually only 13 papers explicitly agreed. And most of them only mentioned the words climate change and took no position. So there's no consensus. And since 2014, the scientific evidence actually shows that CO2 is not the control knob. It doesn't control climate. And that's because climate is very, very, very complex. So you may not have thought of the moon's orbit having any effect on climate, but it does. Ocean currents, cosmic rays, albedo, maybe you have heard of that, especially in the farming community. But all these elements are very complex and they all interact. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has known this for a long time. And in 2001, they said, the climate research and modeling, we should recognize that we are dealing with a coupled, non-linear, chaotic system. And therefore, that long-term prediction of future climate states is not possible. So when Greta Thunberg tells you that it's going to be 5 degrees hotter 100 years from now, she doesn't know. That's impossible. But here, some more magical thinking from our green friends, net zero. The first graph here shows Canada's total energy consumption by source. And you cannot see wind and solar on that graph. And yet, people are trying to tell us that within 7 years, 30 years, we're going to entirely run our operations off wind and solar? No. The other one is from BP. That shows total global energy consumption by source. Now you can see renewables a tiny bit, that little orange thing at the top. Obviously, we're going to be using fossil fuels for a long time. One thing that people don't realize, and probably we don't think about it much because we're geopolitically removed from the rest of the world, but Europe and North America make up only 15% of the world's population, 15%. So these other nations, the emerging nations, are booming. South Asia is 4 times our population. And so you can see in the other graph that the OECD nation demand for oil, gas, and coal is pretty much flat. But in the non-OECD nations, it's growing and will continue to grow. So there's always going to be a market for our product. Now, these claims about sustainable jobs replacing conventional energy, it's just laughable. And if you're on Twitter, you should follow this fellow named John Lee Pettimore. He's a retired mining mechanic, and he keeps posting pictures of all these enormously huge mining machines with little tiny people beside it, and telling people how many thousands of liters of fuel they go through in a day. So, also if you're going to build a wind turbine, to get wind power, you need oil, you need natural gas, and you need coal. And once those wind turbines are built, you need those to back it up as well. Likewise, people keep saying, oh, we're going to be leaders in mining for critical minerals. Well, maybe we are, but we're going to be using these fuel-guzzling massive machines to do it. And claims of reaching net zero 2030 or 2050 are equally laughable. There's a fellow named Simon Michelle who did an analysis for the Geological Survey of Finland. And he just simply extrapolated the materials being used today and mined today, and did a simple mathematical extrapolation to the materials intended to be used in the future. And of course, he found that for lithium, it would take us 9,900 years to mine the equivalent lithium required for net zero goals. So that's impossible. And likewise, J.P. Morgan's Michael Chimbalas is an energy realist on decarbonization. He did an analysis where, some of you people may work in Leduc-Nisku in the industrial area there. So he did an analysis of decarbonization, and running all these manufacturing processes off electricity instead of natural gas. And he found that it would be 3 to 6 times higher in cost for electricity than for natural gas. Well, who can bear that burden? And not to mention, right now, for our existing EV policy, we need 10,000 megawatts additional power generation. We need to build 10,000 megawatts more power generation just for the EV policy. That's not counting electrifying all the industries of Canada, which is allegedly the goal. So how did we end up with a climate emergency? Well, there's this set of scenarios called RCPs. It means representative concentration pathway. It's talking about the warming influence of carbon dioxide and a few other parameters. But one of them is called RCP 8.5, and that's the tallest one there with the big cross through it. It's totally implausible, and yet in 2014, these 2 green billionaires put out a report called Risky Business. It propagated throughout the financial community, and they represented RCP 8.5 as if that's our business as usual path. which of course looks very scary and catastrophic, but it's an implausible scenario. It'll never happen. And just to be clear, China emits in 1 month what Canada emits in a year and a half. So no matter what we do, we're not going to stop climate change. And with all due respect to all of our immigrants who we know and love, my father was an immigrant, this is about carbon footprints. Immigration volumes of 400,000 people a year make it absolutely impossible to meet climate targets, if that's what you want to do. And Darshan Maharaja did the math here. There's a project that the government has called Century Initiative. They want the population of Canada to be 100 million by the end of the century. So if they bring 100 million people and everyone's carbon footprint is about 16 tons per person, then that would be about 1.5 billion tons yearly in additional CO2. And even the parliamentary budget officer is not on board with the climate bandwagon. He issued a report in November of last year, and he stated that while the impact on Canadian GDP is from global GHG emissions, Canada's own emissions are not large enough to materially impact climate change. So the good news is after I went to Porto, all the scientists who were there formed a group called CLINTEL. It's based in Holland, and their theme is that there's no climate emergency, and they provide documentation showing why that is so. So ultimately, there's no need to divide society with dangerous dreams of climate ideologues. Energy is life, and we have to realize that energy illiteracy and climate policies are destroying Canada, and they're creating a global energy crisis, famine, and widespread heat or eat poverty. So if you'd like to see more of my work, I'm on Social Science Research Net. You might like this one, Ecofeminist Energy Illiteracy, Greta in Alberta Oil Country. And then my set of letters to everyone I could think of about the tar sands tipping point documentary that CBC did a few years ago. They destroyed the reputation of the oil sands. And I also have a blog where you can see more of my work. And I thank you very much for coming to this evening.